It began at 14,000 feet, where even oxygen is scarce, and Indian and Chinese soldiers clashed in the Galwan Valley with nothing but sticks and stones, forbidden to fire rifles as the temperature plunged to minus 40 degrees Celsius. 20 men died, rewriting the rules of modern conflict. How did the world's largest armies end up fighting medieval style on the edge of the Himalayas? And what else about this impossible border have you never been told? The clash in Galwan Valley began as the sun dipped behind jagged Himalayan peaks, leaving the valley shrouded in darkness and cold. Colonel B. Santosh Babu led his men toward patrolling Point 14, tasked with confronting a Chinese encampment that had appeared overnight along the narrow, rocky riverbank. What started as a tense standoff exploded into violence. Hundreds of soldiers surged forward, wielding clubs wrapped in barbed wire, iron rods and stones torn from the riverbed. Rifles slung across their backs remained silent, bound by agreements that forbade gunfire this close to the line of actual control. For 6 hours, the only sounds were shouts, the crack of wood on bone, and the roar of the Galwan River. In the chaos, men tumbled down icy slopes and into the torrent below. Some drowned. Others were battered by rocks hurled from above. Colonel Babu fought at the front, rallying his unit even as the melee pressed them against the water's edge. By dawn, 20 Indian soldiers lay dead, including Colonel Babu himself. The bodies of some were carried downstream and were recovered days later from the Shyok River, miles from where they fell. Chinese casualties remain unconfirmed. Indian sources estimate more than 40 dead, with many swept away by the current or lost in the darkness. Survivors described a night when the rules of modern war vanished, replaced by raw survival at the edge of the world. The Galwan clash left scars deeper than any wound, a reminder that, in this impossible geography, even the world's largest armies can be reduced to fighting with their bare hands. At this altitude, the rules of war are rewritten by the land itself. The line of actual control stretches roughly 3,488 kilometers across the Himalayas, tracing a border that neither side fully agrees upon. Here, oxygen drops to just 60% of what is found at sea level. Soldiers arriving from lower elevations risk headaches, nausea, and even life-threatening pulmonary edema. Acclimatization takes weeks, and the unprepared can die without ever seeing the enemy. The mountains themselves are a fortress. Steep, icy passes cut off roads for months, and avalanches can bury entire convoys. Heavy tanks and armored vehicles are useless, either too slow or too heavy to cross the narrow, crumbling tracks. Even helicopters struggle, their engines gasping in the thin air, their payloads strictly limited. Every bullet, ration, and blanket has to be hauled hundreds of kilometers over high passes, often by hand or on muleback. The logistics chain is stretched to its breaking point, favoring small mobile units over mechanized might. The environment is not the only constraint. Since 1996, both countries have agreed not to use firearms or explosives within 2 kilometers of the line of actual control, hoping to prevent accidental escalation. But in these temperatures, sometimes dropping to minus 40 degrees Celsius, rifles freeze, lubricants seize, and ammunition can misfire. The treaties and the climate together forced armies equipped for the 21st century to fight with the weapons of the Middle Ages. The impossible terrain and these agreements have shaped every decision, pushing both sides to seek new ways to survive and outmaneuver each other in the world's highest standoff. The contest for control along the line of actual control is fought not just with soldiers, but with roads, bridges, and settlements. In the months before the Galwan clash, both India and China accelerated construction in the high Himalayas, each project laying claim to the land beneath it. For Indian planners, the Darbuk-Shak-Daulat Beg Oldi Road, known as the DSDBO, became a lifeline to the remote northern outpost called Daulat Beg Oldi. This 255-kilometer route, carved through permafrost and shifting rock, allowed supplies and reinforcements to reach the border year-round. The road's completion signaled a permanent Indian presence in territory long vulnerable to isolation by weather or blockade. China answered with its own engineering. The G219 highway, running through Tibet and Xinjiang, had already tied the region together with a modern ribbon of asphalt. But Beijing's strategy went further. New border villages, helipads, and fortified bunkers appeared seemingly overnight, each one pushing the limits of what could be considered Chinese territory. This approach became known as salami slicing, incremental moves that avoid outright war but steadily shift the status quo. May 5, 2020, brought the first open confrontation of this new phase. Near Pangong Tso, a glacial lake stretching over 130 kilometers, Indian and Chinese troops clashed in a nighttime melee on the narrow, finger-like ridges that define the disputed shoreline. The skirmish was brief but violent, with both sides suffering injuries. Behind the fighting stood the logic of concrete and steel. Whoever builds, stays. In these mountains, a road or a bunker is more than infrastructure. It is a statement of intent, a line drawn in stone. Shots rang out over the line of actual control on September 7, 2020. For the first time in 45 years, bullets cracked the thin Himalayan air, shattering the uneasy silence that treaties had tried to enforce. Both India and China accused each other of firing first, but neither side reported casualties. The standoff had reached a dangerous new threshold, one where the risk of escalation could no longer be contained by old agreements or the frozen mechanics of high-altitude weaponry. On the ground, commanders faced the impossible task of holding their positions without igniting a wider war. Field negotiators worked through the night, relaying tense radio messages back to their headquarters. In makeshift shelters pitched on icy ridges, officers from both armies met face-to-face under white flags, searching for a way to pull back without appearing weak. Every movement was measured, every word weighed against the possibility of catastrophe. The first hotline between Indian and Chinese field commanders was established, a direct link meant to prevent misunderstandings from spiraling out of control. Over the following months, a series of Corps commander talks unfolded at remote outposts and tented negotiation tables. Agreements were hammered out, sector by sector. By July 2021, troops began disengaging from Galwan, Hot Springs, and Gogra. Buffer zones replaced forward posts, and patrols were pulled back to reduce the chance of another deadly encounter. Yet the process was slow and incomplete. Tensions flared again in December 2022, this time in Arunachal Pradesh, where dozens of soldiers were injured in another violent clash. The withdrawal brought relief, but the shadow of mistrust remained, every step forward matched by a cautious glance over the shoulder. On October 21, 2024, negotiators from India and China reached a breakthrough at two of the most contested points along the line of actual control, Depsang and Demchok. After 4 years of tense standoff, the agreement restored patrolling rights that existed before 2020 for both militaries, and it allowed local herders to return to traditional grazing grounds. Troops began pulling back, dismantling temporary outposts, and removing barriers set up during the crisis. The deal included a staggered patrol schedule, with prior notification required to avoid sudden encounters. This arrangement was announced just as Prime Minister Modi and President Xi met on the sidelines of the BRICS summit, their handshake captured in headlines across Asia. Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar described the outcome as step-by-step progress, careful not to declare victory, but acknowledging a rare moment of consensus. For the first time since the Galwan clash, the border felt less like a powder keg, if only for a moment. In May 2025, China issued new names for dozens of locations inside Arunachal Pradesh, reigniting old disputes and drawing a sharp response from New Delhi. India restated its sovereignty, but the symbolic move underscored how little trust had been rebuilt. More than 100,000 soldiers remained stationed across the Himalayas, their camps stretching from Ladakh to Arunachal. Economic ties, once touted as a stabilizing force, remained strained. India's bans on Chinese technology and investment persisted, while Beijing deepened its partnership with Pakistan. The uneasy calm depended on constant vigilance. The world watched as two nuclear powers remained locked in a contest shaped as much by suspicion as by geography. Today, over 100,000 troops remain locked in the Himalayan heights, each side still shaping the border with new maps, new roads, and renewed suspicion. As altitude and mistrust collide, fragile diplomacy is all that stands between uneasy peace and escalation. The world watches, because here, mistakes echo far beyond the mountains.